In China today, police want to move in and clamp down on the unprecedented protests against COVID lockdowns. That is a protester in the city of Hangzhou being detained and taken away from a demonstration in a mall. On the streets of the capital, Beijing, police there, too, moving in to break up any demonstration. So for the most part, last night, the streets were quiet after the noisy weekend protests. On at least one campus, students, university students, sent home for the holiday break early in order to tamp down any sort of campus activism. Let's take you to Hong Kong for more live reporting on this. Richard Kimber is with us this morning. Richard, we've been watching this so very closely. The world has been watching very closely this unprecedented, widespread protest against the government of Xi Jinping. What is happening today?
Well, things have certainly calmed down in terms of the protest activity, both on the Chinese mainland and here in Hong Kong. We saw, of course, here in Hong Kong, shows of defiance and support for the protest action that was taking place in China. We saw people gathering and holding up pieces of plain white paper, a message of their inability, they said, to show real protest towards the government of the Communist Party in China. Those protests that we saw have effectively disappeared overnight, largely because of a very large police presence in many big cities and in university campuses, both in Hong Kong and in the Chinese mainland, putting a stop to those types of gatherings, often on the grounds of trying to prevent, as the police say, the risk of COVID transmission. There's also been reports on Chinese social media of people who had been in attendance at those types of gatherings receiving phone calls from the police the following day, sparking fears about their data being tracked or their movements being tracked. And that's effectively caused a de-escalation fairly quickly of the confidence that seemed to exist just briefly in China to hold protests like this and call in such an unprecedented way, as you say, for the resignation of the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Richard, it has been the strict zero COVID policy and the lockdown that has been really the spark to this protest. And there was a briefing earlier today from various health officials. After these protests, any indication that the government is willing to bend or to loosen some of the policy protocols because of the protests?
Well, I sat through that entire briefing. It was fairly long and slightly repetitive, but the key message really from officials was that while not acknowledging these protests in any way, shape or form, they did acknowledge the effect of the strict COVID policies. A quote I can just read you from one of the main officials there. He said that lockdowns in China should always be quick and the removal of lockdowns should always be quick. He also said that the classification of high-risk areas should be based only on scientific results and should not be arbitrarily implemented. An acknowledgement there, perhaps, of what's been happening across many provinces in China, and accusations of this are rife over Chinese social media, that local governments have been implementing strict COVID policies, often arbitrarily, in order to try and please the central government, because of a sense that that's the way to try and win favour with Chinese authorities, who are so determined to try and eradicate COVID-19 entirely. And it's that frustration that's affected not just individuals in China, but also big businesses, because there are so many big companies, including suppliers to the likes of Apple, that have really been hammered by these types of policies, and they're all calling for the same thing, which is for them to be eased and for life to get back to normal.
Richard Kimber, thank you very much in Hong Kong this morning.